I'm Shar Banerjee, and this is Books That Built Me. I'm an ex-executive turned to leadership coach specializing in people managers. My job is to get people out of their manager headspace and into their leadership growth space. I typically work with clients to build leadership DNA and self-leadership muscles in either group programs or one-to-one coaching. But on this show, we're going to dive deep into the stories of other leaders. And it all starts with a book that they believe has fueled their passion, influenced their decisions, and turned book lessons into life lessons. Welcome to Books That Built Me. Today, I'm in conversation with Caroline Thomson, and in today's episode, we're going to be discussing The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I'm so glad you could join us. Here we go. So this is the book that we're going to be talking about today. It's titled The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's a leadership fable. So first of all, how did you, like when I told you about this thing that I'm doing, instantly you said, well, it's got to be The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. That's the book that I would bring to the table. What is it about this book that really resonated with you?
This book has followed me throughout my career, to be honest. It's been like a sidekick of mine. And I was first introduced to it when I spoke to a coach. This was back in like 2008, about the team dynamics that one of my clients was going through. And we introduced this book in the team. And it was transformational because it really walks you through how to avoid the dysfunctions of the team. So fast forward now to 2023, I have the pleasure of leading sessions, leading workshops with teams where we go through the five dysfunctions of a team and help, design the dynamics around the team. So this book has been really transformational for me in my life because it has offered me the framework to really guide teams and people to figure out how to be the most effective team possible. And that's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I thank you so much for introducing this book to me, because I think when you first spoke about it, I thought, that's so useful. That's an interesting way to think about it. But transformational is a word that you used a few times now, and it's probably the most in keeping word with the power that this framework has on anyone who's part of a team. And I think especially if you're
Absolutely.
leading a team, right?
And that is true whether you're on a team in a corporation, on a sports team, on any kind of team. Like it could be recreational. Patrick Lencioni, the author, often talks about how he implemented, like the model in his teams in a church setting. So it's like universal.
Yeah. And that's so interesting because when I was reading this book, I thought of teams because the fable is of a corporate setting. However,
Mm-hmm.
my mind quickly went to the other places in my life where teamwork is essential to operations, including relationships, right? Like you don't talk, he doesn't talk about it necessarily in that regard, but there are a lot of principles here that are just so foundational to relationships.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And interesting that you say that because the base of the model, which is like in a pyramid shape, is trust. And
Yeah.
isn't that key in all relationships?
Isn't that key? Yeah, so let's go there. So
Yeah.
let's go there. The pyramid. So the pyramid is the crux to which everything is built. And so for our listeners who have not yet read this book, the entire idea is that there are five dysfunctions of every
Mm-hmm.
team. The
Mm-hmm.
bottom base one feeds into the layer above, which then feeds into the layer above, which, and on until we get to the top. And
Mm-hmm.
what, Carolyn, you're talking about is the base of the pyramid is trust. In fact, the way
Mm-hmm.
that they say it is the first dysfunction of any team setting is the absence of trust. And
Mm-hmm.
another way to think about it is trust is essential to the creation or to the productive motion of a team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, we have um, the next layer is fear of conflict. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
second dysfunction, which
Mm-hmm.
is that when you don't have trust,
Mm-hmm.
that's that makes it difficult to move up. But the second rank is that you fear conflict in
Mm-hmm.
your team.
Mm-hmm.
And the other way to
Mm-hmm.
think about that is how to get productive in the way that you have conflict in your teams,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Which then feeds into the third level, um, which is lack of commitment. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a dysfunction in a team,
Mm-hmm.
is when you don't necessarily have that like drive for commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're seeking true, deep, essential commitment
Mm-hmm.
within your teams. The fourth principle here is accountability. So the
Mm-hmm.
dysfunction is when your team is avoiding accountability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into like what that looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, accountability is like the thing that you want to really drive home when you're building teams. And then the last one, oh, the last one is just so, it's like, it truly is the little crown on top of the pyramid. But what they say is the dysfunction is inattention to results.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to think about what it is that you want with a team is a truly like a desire to win collectively, a desire
Mm-hmm.
to win. Mhm.
As opposed to winning individually.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so that's the model, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
pyramid. And it's so interesting for anyone who's not read it. Basically about what four-fifths of this book is a story, and the last portion of the book, the last 20% of this book is the principle.
Mm-hmm.
So Patrick Lencioni did such an interesting job of introducing the pyramid through storytelling, which is, 80% of this book is the story of how a management team went from dysfunction and poor results and being eaten alive by their competition to winning the game, and what
Mm-hmm.
that meant, and the drama of it all, and the politics, and the interpersonal conflict and the resolution of it all. And so that's 80% of the book, which, by the way, for me, as I was flipping through this, it almost felt like I was watching a movie.
Right? Totally.
So captivating, so captivating. And then he talks about, okay, well, here are the principles. So
Mm-hmm.
let's dive into the principles, because this is where like you know this is where it gets really, really interesting. How do you kick this off in your universe? Like, how does this show up for you in the work that you do? How do you start?
Okay, that's a good question. Shout out to the co-founder of Iceberg Management. Her name is Mizuna Kei. She developed a program and like a sequence that allows the teams to live the five dysfunctions of a team and work through them. So I would say that the way that it comes about typically for us is that first we see the symptoms in a team. There's something that's not right. There's some arguing, or people are not getting along, or they're seemingly getting along, but there's no decisions being made. It all seems very surface. The meetings take 5 minutes and, nothing much happens. These are signs that there are some dysfunctions. And that's how we meet teams to begin with. So sometimes, actually, oftentimes, the actual dysfunction is not clear. It's symptoms that we see right on the surface. So to be really thorough, we go through the five dysfunctions, and there's always something to work on at every level.
Yeah. That's
Um,
that's that's so beautifully put, because that's exactly what happens in the story too, where
yes.
they bring on this new CEO, and she spends, I can't remember the exact amount of time, but a month, 2 months, just kind of watching and taking
Observing.
notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so
Exactly.
that's the call out, right? Of like what is happening is
Hmm.
you just kind of have to watch the symptoms.
So yes, in the fable, Catherine is a seasoned executive who was called into this company called Decision Tech that was previously doing extremely well in its industry. It's in Silicon Valley, so this is like a familiar story, that we can anticipate, sort of what's going to happen. However, what they did differently is that the former CEO brought Catherine in to really shake up the team. The chairman of the board gave her the mandate of restructuring and turning things around for this company. And when you read about Catherine's description, she's not like the other team members. She's quite different and actually, from the get go, destined to fail in her new role because she didn't have experience in tech. However, she has a knack for reading the signs of a team that is not as optimal as it could be. And that's how they bring her in. And lo and behold, her leadership skills are exactly what the team needs at Decision Tech.
Yeah. 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 And that's the story. Like I said, it was like watching a movie but in book form.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what Catherine decides to do after her month long observations is that she takes the team on two offsite meetings. And they spend several days together and they really focus on what is happening because no matter what resources you have, how much money you have, how much shares of the competition you have, if you don't have the right team, the right people, the company is set up for failure.
Yeah.
Having the right team in place that is functional and optimal is really the key to success, no matter what context or how many resources you have. That's really the key, and that's the basis of the book.
A big takeaway from me that wasn't really addressed in the theoretical portion, but was kind of touched on in the fable part was the idea that teams have layers. And what I mean by
Yes.
this is, you called out this retreat where all the
Hmm.
C-suite kind of all gathered, all the senior executives were together and they were building the framework for what great teamwork looks like, and they were
Hmm.
building a team for themselves from scratch.
Hmm.
And part of the
Hmm.
conflict that happens in the book or in the story is they go back to the workplace and they
Hmm.
already have this pre-existing team because they're heads of their own departments, and the
Yes.
relationships that they have within their own teams is much stronger than the
Hmm.
relationships that they're learning to build with their own senior sort of counterparts. And that in itself creates some conflict in the confidentiality and I think the mutual trust and respect that's
Hmm.
sort of supposed to form for new people. And so that's a part of the book that she kind of touches on. But what I really loved is the introduction of the idea that there is a primary team
Hmm. Hmm.
and there is a secondary team. And the secondary team is doomed to fail if you don't put in the work of we are a team first and they are a team second.
And isn't that interesting? Because oftentimes we see structures where there's a leader who's in charge of a department or a function, and all their time is dedicated to that secondary team and the success and the rise of that team. However, if there isn't that base in the management team, the senior leadership team, it's like we're missing a layer of direction, of leadership, of inspiration.
Yeah. And that's such a great point. And it speaks to the last tip of the pyramid that doesn't
Hmm.
get met because they
Hmm.
say that a big dysfunction in an organization is the introduction of status and ego.
Hmm.
And that
Hmm.
can exist for a department to say that I, as the head of my department, is
Mhm.
doing so well. And look at me and look at my team and look at the product that we are outputting. And so that in itself, though that team is doing really, really great, the
Mhm.
function of a company is to thrive as an entire entity on its own. And an
Mhm.
entity should not understand where one department starts and where another ends, right? Like it should be
Mhm.
fluid. And in order to
Mhm.
be fluid, you have to forego the status and the operations of one unit and ego of one unit over others.
Mhm. Mhm. And
It
that's
almost
not
felt like,
easy to
sorry,
achieve. Mhm. Go ahead.
it really felt like a mosaic when I was reflecting on that piece of it. It truly felt like pieces come together, and the art that is an output of that is far greater than what the piece of it alone represents.
Mhm. Absolutely. And if we go back to the model, because it's reminding me of the importance of trust, because it's like the center of the mosaic. We can't have other pieces that are attached or are fitting in properly if trust is not there.
Yeah.
And that's what Catherine discovered in her. Really, on the surface, people said that they trusted each other, but it was more of a predictable type of trust. And here, what we're talking about, true trust, is not, the ability to say, I trust that this person is going to react this way when I bring this up, or when we have a problem, so and so is going to step in. That's not real trust. Real trust takes vulnerability. And to be vulnerable, people need to know all of the different pieces of ourselves. And actually, we're each our own mosaic, aren't we?
Mm. And honestly, thank you for calling that out because he calls it vulnerability based trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability based trust as opposed to the other generic type of trust, which is
Mm-hmm.
that it's based on past experience. I know that
Mm-hmm.
you can do X because
Yeah.
in the past you have done something similar to X.
Mm-hmm.
That is different to vulnerability based trust, which is essentially calling out that natural human tendency that we have to self protect
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
saying, let's kind of put that in a corner
Mm-hmm.
and trust
Mm-hmm.
that you will be safe while we put that in a corner.
And trust that you will be safe because your colleagues have your back, right?
Yeah.
They've got this for you. You're not going to be left, out on your own. You're not
Yeah.
alone. We're part of a team.
Yeah. And they basically say that when team members are truly comfortable being exposed to one another, that they act without concern for protecting themselves. And that's the ultimate hindrance to
Yes.
trust is that you are spending or exerting a ton of energy focusing on self protection things rather than focusing your energy and attention completely on the job at hand or being, or you're focusing on being disingenuous or political in a way in order to appear a certain way, as opposed to putting all of that stuff aside and trusting that if you make a mistake or appear in whatever less than ideal way, then that's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Imagine being able to say, hey guys, I made a mistake. Or, you know what, you're better than I am at this. Why don't you take care of this issue with a customer? Without feeling threatened or feeling like, you're going to lose your job because you raised your hand. Like that
Yeah.
is not trust. And how can we bring our best selves if we're always thinking about what's going to happen if I say this, or if I show any weaknesses.
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for calling that out because that's the symptom that you were talking about, are
Yes.
um, being afraid to ask for help, being a symptom, getting nervous about failing or making a mistake,
Hmm.
um, uh, not taking risks because you generally don't even want to be in the vicinity of failure.
Yeah, not taking risks, maybe taking credit for someone else's work because you need to prove yourself and you can't, you don't feel comfortable because you feel vulnerable. You don't feel comfortable displaying any weaknesses. It could be trying to display a certain skill that you don't actually have. Um,
Pretending,
mhm,
maybe
mhm.
even holding grudges.
Yes,
Yes.
unfortunately, yeah. These are all
Yeah.
very human and normal things. But when
Yeah.
we put them all together in a team, the impacts can be huge on productivity, on, the success of the company.
Yeah, yeah. So those are all of these symptoms of not necessarily having true trust in a
Hmm.
functional relationship. And so the opposite of that, so what great looks like, what great trusting relationships look like is you're able to ask for help. You're able to admit that you made a mistake, or you're able to ask questions without fear of judgment. You can take risks in places that you've never sort of existed in previous situations. You offer an apology without hesitation, or
Hmm.
you look forward to connecting with peers, and you look forward to sharing spaces with others, and engaging with them. And appreciation, I feel, also exists here, doesn't it? Like appreciation for the other and what they bring to the
Yes.
table.
Absolutely. And that's where we start at Iceberg Management. When we work on trust in a team, we first do some work with each individual so that they get to know themselves. And we use a personality test called the Atman test that really allows you to gain self-awareness, of your true self and your preferences. And then we share that in the team. And, we find it's a really good way to eh, expose sort of who we really are and what we're bringing to the table. And it opens a discussion on like, oh, okay, I better understand where you're coming from. I better understand like why what you are the way that you are. And we start from that point on to build trust, because self-awareness and social awareness are pillars of emotional intelligence, and also at the basis of trust.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for calling that out, because oftentimes we think we know who we are, and then we do a personality test or some form of a assessment,
Hmm. Hmm.
and we get to see ourselves in different lights.
Hmm.
And we get to have a shared common language with the people that we work with on, hey, I'm
Yes.
like a red circle. Oh, you're a green triangle? Like, what does that mean?
Yes. Exactly. And then you learn to appreciate, what the triangle and the circle bring to the team. And don't we, isn't that what we want, to have a team full of different shapes so that we are not like exactly the same as each other, but we have, different facets. And like you said
Yeah.
at the beginning, a mosaic, which is a really
Yeah.
great metaphor.
Yeah. Like, how boring would Lego be if it was just one blue rectangular block?
Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. So and so, the trust is foundational, and this is why I think you can think about other spaces apart from work. Like, you can think of your community, you can think of your relationships, you can think of all of the places in which you engage with others, and the importance of this foundational building block. So let's move on to the next one, because trust is
Sure.
is huge. But I think the next one too, really resonated with me. I
Hmm.
don't know about you, but conflict.
Hmm.
Conflict is that word that I think will give 50% of the population the heebie-jeebies, and the other
Right.
50% of the population, like, yeah, it is necessary to have conflict. And I really love this topic, because and they called it out. Like, there is a difference between conflict that is unnecessary and goes nowhere,
Hmm.
to productive conflict.
Yes. Yes. And that's what we need, productive conflict. We're talking about ideological conflict, conflict, where we give our true opinion, where we give ideas, and explain ourselves. Like, conflict doesn't have to mean, it doesn't have to have that negative connotation of like a fight or feelings being hurt. It's not about that. This is about business, and it's about exchanging, ideas. And maybe you don't agree with what I'm saying, but I would like to give you the facts so that you see my point of view and so that you understand where I'm coming from. And ultimately, so that we come up with the best solution for the company at this time, right?
Yeah.
It's about
Yeah.
moving things forward. It's not a dictatorship where we do what the leader says and that's it. No, let's use all of our strengths, our creativity, and that means that we will have some ideological conflict, so that we work things out. And
Yeah.
the alternative, if we don't, is that we're going to be sitting on that uncomfortable feeling
Yes.
of not having our voices heard.
The cost of not doing it right is, even as you spoke, I felt it in my bones. Like the
Mm-hmm,
cost of
mm-hmm,
doing it poorly
mm-hmm,
is the stagnant energy, the murky waters on which, all the stuff that you don't like breeds. Like all the mosquitoes are so drawn to the murky
mm-hmm,
waters. It kind of just feels like that. There was one beautiful way in which he described what productive conflict is, and you alluded to it. You said it's the best possible solution, and I thought the other variable that he introduced was very effective, which is time. So it's the best possible solution in the shortest period of time. Like it's effective in its nature of what it
mm-hmm,
does. And I also thought that explaining that it's ideological conflict over other things like
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
emotional is
mm-hmm.
essential. Like you're debating ideas,
Yes.
right? You're not debating feelings, which makes this more reachable for people who are entering conflict. Like it's truly just holding on to an idea, explaining why you're holding on to it, but then also letting it drop because it's just an idea. And
Yes,
yeah,
and that takes trust. Like if you trust that your colleagues are still going to respect you, even if
mhm.
you gave an idea that's not adopted, then it's easier to drop it and to adhere to what the team decided.
Yes. Yes, trust again, it's the foundation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The foundation of this principle lies on trust, and it's so beautifully
Mm-hmm.
done, hey? That this
Mm-hmm.
one rests on the body of trust. Yeah. And honestly, I feel like what also lives here is passion, right? What also
Absolutely.
lives here is like unguarded passion. It
Yes.
allows that part of you to come out.
It does, because when you have an opinion and you're passionate, it means that you are going to give the best version of yourself and the best, ideas that you have. You're not passive. You're actively engaged. And that, helps with all the other aspects of it, of a functional team as well, where you're committed and engaged.
Yeah. 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 And so that's fear of conflict, and the goal here is to turn that into productive conflict.
Turn it into productive conflict. And I can share with you that at Iceberg, what we do to facilitate this part is that we use another assessment called the Thomas Kilmann Index. So it allows each person to discover what their mode of conflict is, how they react to conflict, and how they deal with conflict. So just that introspection alone is helpful to realize, okay, that is how I approach conflict, and how can I improve? How can I approach things differently to be really productive?
I'm so glad you called that out because that's one of my favorite parts of this. I had to go look it up and really do some background research, but I think it's such a great way of understanding what your default mode of conflict
Yes.
handling methodology is. And so for anyone who's not familiar, it's basically an XY scale where on the X axis you have cooperativeness. So do you generally are you low on the cooperative scale or high on the cooperative scale? And on the y axis, we have assertiveness. Like, are you genuinely a kind of like quite assertive person or a lower on the assertive scale, with the idea that you fall into one of five categories, right? Generally, when you're placed in a when you're placed in a situation where there is a conflict and you're trying to handle the conflict, or do you tend to avoid, which is low on assertive, low on cooperativeness? Do you tend to accommodate, which is low on assertiveness but high on cooperativeness? Do you tend to compete, which is high on the assertiveness and then low on the cooperativeness, like I win, you lose? Or do you tend to collaborate, which is high on both of them, right? You're high on assertiveness and high on cooperativeness. And then there's something in the middle, which is halfway on both assertiveness and cooperativeness, which is more on the compromise.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Exactly.
I can totally visualize going into organizations and having them do this
Yes.
program to give them a good idea of like, where do I normally live, and am I
Mhm.
happy there, slash could I potentially exercise a certain muscle to move in a certain dimension?
Mhm. Mhm. And as a side note, that's also where coaching, individual coaching is helpful, where you can work on, what's your perspective on conflict and, how can we evoke some transformation there?
And so this is a question that I have in my heart, which is, as you understand the modes of conflict handling, what's the best one? Or is that the wrong question to ask? Is there a
I
best
don't
one?
know, that's a good question. I think healthy conflicts, healthy debates happen with people who have different, modes of conflict resolution. And I think it's much like a personality color. It's, the way that you approach it. As long as respect is at the
Mhm.
center of it, I don't know if there's an ideal way to approach it. I think authenticity and respect bring out the best in people. But that's my opinion.
Wow. And honestly, what you just did is, in my brain, my formulaic scientific brain, you just added a new variable. You added the Z axis, which, which is respect and authenticity. And the assumption here is that respect and authenticity is at 100%,
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
top of which you can start looking at these modes. Because if
Hmm.
respect and authenticity is missing, then I'm sure there's like shades of darkness in all of these modes that are like on the surface level, like harder to probably appreciate.
Hmm. Hmm. And whether you're high on the assertiveness scale or low, there's someone that you need to respect, including yourself and your
Mm.
opinions and your needs.
Wow. My formula brain is going nuts. Like now we're talking about another
I just
dimension,
messed it
which
up
is,
for you.
no, it's beautiful. It's self-respect and self-authority too. Like,
Yes,
what is
yes.
your part that you play here
Hmm.
while you're undergoing conflict with another? Yeah.
Hmm. Exactly. What happens when there's a you win, I lose? Hmm.
Yeah. 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 You win, I lose. Hmm. Moving on to the next level that is built on top of trust and on top of conflict, or I should say productive conflict, is commitment.
Hmm.
And that's it for our first part of this two-part episode of Books That Built Me. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. It really helps support what we're doing. Thanks for listening, and you can always find me on my LinkedIn at Shar Banerjee. If you're dealing with a leadership challenge, I would love to hear from you and have you join our community. And of course, I'll talk to you next Tuesday for part 2 of this two-part episode of Books That Built Me.